Professional actors, they go in and they lay it on the line and do the best they can. Let me tell you, can I say one thing? To me, Stanley, the great Stanley Kubrick, was an enemy of the actor, and I can point out films he's done. The worst performances I've ever seen in... The sound cuts off abruptly. In his most recent interview with Variety magazine, Robert Duvall, the iconic face of authentic acting, the man who brought Tom Hagen in The Godfather and Colonel Kilgore in Apocalypse Now to life, has shaken Hollywood by frankly pointing out those he would never forgive. At over 90 years old, Duvall is no longer silent as he was for decades. Calmly, but with a steely gaze, he recalled the years of betrayal and professional wounds that had never been spoken of publicly. There were people who conspired to take away his assets. There were stars who openly attacked him on live television, shaking his reputation to its foundations. And most painfully of all, the one he once called his first teacher was the same person who initiated the call to isolate him from Hollywood. In the end, what names did Robert Duvall bring to public light in his unexpected confession? And among them, who caused him the deepest wound, one that still throbbed alive in his memory? Robert Duvall's enemies, the price of authenticity. Marlon Brando. When idolatry turned into obsession and disillusionment. The summer of 1971. New York was burning like fire, and inside the Paramount studio, the team of The Godfather was at the height of filming. Francis Ford Coppola, just over 30 years old, thin and sleepless under the relentless pressure of the studio, was constantly tense. Among dozens of nervous people, there was only one who walked slowly, with an almost divine arrogance, as if the whole world had to wait for him. Marlon Brando. He was already a legend, a living myth, considered the soul of American cinema, capable of igniting the screen with a single glance. At that time, Robert Duvall was just a secondary face, a theater actor who was just setting foot in Hollywood. On Brando's first day on set, the atmosphere changed from reverence to chaos. He arrived almost 2 hours late, with a cigarette in his hand and dark glasses, accompanied by 3 personal assistants. No one dared to remind him. A member of the lighting team later told the New York Post, "When he entered, the entire crew fell silent as if the president had arrived." At that time, Duvall still idolized Brando. He had seen his performances in On the Waterfront and A Streetcar Named Desire until he had memorized them, believing that Brando was the embodiment of artistic freedom and authenticity. But only a few weeks later, that admiration transformed into a deep discomfort and finally, into disillusionment. Brando refused to learn his lines, skipped group script readings, and demanded that cards with his dialogues be taped all over the set, even on the back of James Caan, so that he could surreptitiously look at them. A crew member revealed to The New Yorker that he once stood behind the camera for 6 hours straight, holding dialogue panels for Brando to read. "We called it acting class for bad memory," he joked bitterly. What disappointed Duvall the most was the way Brando used his unpredictability to dominate the set. In emotional scenes, Brando would often deliberately change his lines, altering the rhythm of his co-stars and forcing multiple retakes. He never let anyone know what he was going to do. Sometimes he would say things completely different from the script, Duvall recalled. Coppola, who idolized Brando, tolerated it all. For Duvall, this was not creative genius, but chaos with a layer of brilliance, a disregard for professionalism. In March 1972, The Godfather was released and became a cultural phenomenon. Brando was hailed as the perfect Don, while Duvall was simply praised for his solidity as the loyal counselor Tom Hagen. Shortly after, Variety revealed that Paramount gave Brando an extra bonus of $50,000 for his media effect, while no one else received anything. The leak of the internal accounting shocked the crew. A Los Angeles Times journalist described Duvall leaving the press conference early, with a face like a stone. A year later, Brando surprised the world again. On March 27, 1973, at the Oscar Awards, when his name was announced as Best Actor, Brando did not appear. Instead, he sent the Native American activist Sachin Littlefeather to the stage to reject the statuette, in protest of Hollywood's distortion of indigenous images. The act was broadcast live throughout the United States. Half the nation praised him for speaking the truth. The other half called him reckless. Duvall saw it all at his home in Los Angeles. For him, that was the last straw. He saw it as a betrayal of those who had built the film, a lack of respect for the collective work. Since then, Brando became stranger. On The Tonight Show in 1975, he brought a real parrot, leaving Johnny Carson speechless. In 1978, he threw a journalist out of his mansion for daring to ask him about his weight. Hollywood began to see Brando as a brilliant madman, while Duvall called him a symphony of self-destruction. In 1990, a real tragedy struck his personal life. His son, Christian Brando, shot his sister's boyfriend, Cheyenne. During the trial that lasted almost 2 years, Brando remained seated in silence, with gray hair and a heavy face. He cried when his son was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The media called it the Corleone tragedy in real life. Christian went to prison. Cheyenne suffered from depression and later ended her life in Tahiti. Brando spent his last years in isolation, weighing almost 140 kilograms and avoiding the press. Esquire wrote, "Brando once created a great Don Vito Corleone and then lived the rest of his life becoming that man." In 1991, when asked, Duvall simply said at a press conference, "Genius. Sometimes it's just chaos filmed up close." After that, he never mentioned Brando again. In 2004, Brando passed away in Los Angeles. His funeral brought together hundreds of stars, but Duvall was absent. A former crew member of The Godfather said that he sent Coppola a simple white card with only 3 words: "Let it end." Of all the conflicts Duvall endured, only Brando left him bewildered and disillusioned, a monument crumbling before his eyes, instilling in him the fear that talent without discipline ends in ruin. Al Pacino. When a colleague became an invisible rival. But a few years later, Robert Duvall embarked on another complicated relationship, not with an older legend, but with someone who once called him brother on the set of The Godfather, Al Pacino. In the mid-1970s, Hollywood adored 2 types of men, 2 archetypes that embodied the new masculinity. One of them was Robert Duvall, a quiet, reserved man with a monk-like appearance, with a contained intensity that exploded on the screen. The other was fiery and tense, capable of attracting all eyes when he entered a room, Al Pacino. The two were close friends, almost inseparable in the early 70s, when The Godfather was being filmed. According to an old article in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, Duvall and Pacino once shared a small apartment in Beverly Glen. They ate canned noodles, split the rent, and studied dialogues late into the night. Duvall helped Pacino with breathing techniques. Pacino taught Duvall how to keep the anger in his eyes when the camera got close. They looked like brothers, comrades on an uncertain journey. On the set of the party in The Godfather, people often saw the two joking in a trailer, sharing cold coffee, talking about making movies from the heart, not for fame. But things changed drastically after the release of the second part in 1974. The sequel turned Al Pacino into an international superstar, an icon of ambition with his face everywhere. Covers of Time, Rolling Stone, People. Meanwhile, although praised as the most reliable man on the screen, Duvall withdrew from the noise. He returned to his farm in Virginia, raised horses, read plays, and only accepted roles he really liked. Their divergent paths opened an invisible gap that neither of them admitted. In 1989, Paramount announced The Godfather, Part 3. Hollywood exploded. Variety called it the reunion of the century. Coppola wanted the old cast to return. Both Pacino and Duvall were invited. The first conversations went smoothly until the numbers appeared on the contract. According to Hollywood Reporter, Paramount offered Pacino $5 million plus 5% of the box office profits, while Duvall was offered only $1 million, not even a fifth. On September 4, 1989, the cover of Variety read, "Paramount bets on Pacino and forgets Duvall." Inside the studio, the tension was growing. A member of the public relations staff recalled that Duvall read the contract 3 times, said nothing during the meeting, and then stood up and left. Days later, he sent a fax to Coppola writing briefly, "I don't want to come back just to be someone's backdrop." When Duvall's withdrawal was confirmed, the New York Post described it as a heartbreaking crack in the wall of icons. The character of Tom Hagen, who was once the moral compass of the first 2 films, was erased and only mentioned in a single line. Some reports claim that Coppola tried to persuade Pacino to reduce his salary so that Duvall could stay, but Pacino refused. An investigation by Entertainment Weekly quoted an internal source from Paramount. Pacino simply said, "That's the studio's business, not mine." That observation became the center of the debate. Public opinion compared one with the other. Principle, fame. On December 20th, 1990, The Godfather, Part 3, premiered at the Mann's Chinese Theater in Los Angeles. The entire cast was present, except for Robert Duvall. According to the Los Angeles Times, that same morning he flew back to Virginia, avoiding the press. A close friend said that he couldn't bear to hear the main song without Tom Hagen's face. The film was a financial success, but critics called it a soulless film. The Chicago Tribune wrote, "When Duvall left, The Godfather lost its voice of reason." After that, Duvall almost disappeared from noisy Hollywood, returning only with smaller projects like Tender Mercies or The Apostle, while Pacino continued to climb to the top, living among flashes and tabloid scandals. In 2023, TMZ and the Daily Mail reported that Pacino, at 83, was expecting a child with his 29-year-old partner. At the AFI Lifetime Achievement Awards ceremony, a reporter saw Robert Duvall sitting in the back row avoiding the cameras. A former assistant revealed that he just shook his head as he left the room, before Pacino took the stage to be honored. Both never met again in 2011, during the reunion of the cast of The Godfather at the Oscars, when the camera focused on Pacino and Duvall, who were less than 3 meters apart, but never looked at each other. The audience applauded. Two men who once called each other brothers were now just two parallel shadows, not even touching with their eyes. The media called it the silent war that lasted half a century. No noise, no attacks, just a void that neither of them would fill. One chose fame, the other integrity. Both successful, but they were never in the same frame again. Stanley Kubrick, the emotionless genius who gave Duvall the chills. However, if his conflict with Pacino remained polite and silent, the next confrontation was completely different. It did not happen on a film set, but in a small room in London, where he faced a man the world called a genius, Stanley Kubrick. Winter, 1980. England was shrouded in fog. At the Odeon Leicester Square, The Shining had just premiered and the Western press exploded. The Guardian called Stanley Kubrick the man who turned nightmares into art, while Time magazine described him as a director capable of manipulating fear with a glance. Critics were fascinated. Theaters were packed. But 6,000 kilometers away, in his cabin in Virginia, Robert Duvall was watching a BBC documentary about how the film was made, and the more he watched, the colder he felt. That program was How The Shining Was Made, broadcast in prime time in December 1980. The images showed Shelley Duvall, who played Wendy Torrance, exhausted, with disheveled hair, deep dark circles, holding a baseball bat with trembling hands. Kubrick forced her to shoot a single scene 127 times, insisting that the fear on her face was not real enough. Every time she asked for a break, Kubrick responded coldly. According to a lighting technician, Shelley lost hair daily, was isolated from the crew, and needed months of psychiatric care after filming. When the documentary aired, the public was shocked and outraged. The BBC called it a masterpiece paid for with tears. Robert Duvall watched in silence, smoking one cigarette after another. For Duvall, who believed that acting was empathy, the images were no different from a recorded torture session. Few knew that months later, in February 1981, Kubrick unexpectedly invited him to London to talk about the unproduced script for Aryan Papers, in which he wanted Duvall to play a conflicted German officer. Out of curiosity, Duvall accepted. The meeting took place in Kubrick's small office at Boreham Wood Studios. According to a production assistant's notes, there were only 3 people: Kubrick, Duvall, and his secretary. No laughter, no coffee. Kubrick spoke for almost 30 minutes about the distribution of lighting, the rhythm of the actors' breathing, and how to control the audience with their nervous rhythm. Duvall did not interrupt, he just stared. A guard later told the Telegraph that when Duvall left, he simply told the driver, "The air in there was colder than a morgue." The Aryan Papers project was later cancelled. Kubrick gave no explanation. Duvall returned to the United States, rejecting any offer of collaboration. In a private letter to his close friend, director Horton Foote, archived at UCLA, Duvall wrote, "I can't work with someone who uses emotions as tools. That kind of art makes the audience cry, but it leaves the actor empty." 30 years later, in 2010, during a roundtable, Robert Duvall was asked about the director he found most difficult to work with. He firmly stated that Stanley Kubrick was the enemy of the actors. Hollywood was divided in two. Some argued that Duvall was conservative, that he did not understand extreme art, but others took his side. His phrase, "emotionless genius," became a symbol of the eternal debate between art and humanity in Hollywood. Robert Duvall never retracted those words. In an interview, he only said that Kubrick was a genius, but a genius without a heart. The irony was that the same man Duvall once considered his teacher, Francis Ford Coppola, gradually became a frightening replica of Kubrick, ambitious, grandiose, but distant from people. For Duvall, that was the second great disillusionment. From the admiration for Brando, through the distance with Pacino, to the chills from Kubrick, Duvall thought he had become immune to disappointment. But he was wrong, because the biggest shock, the deepest wound, came from the same man who once helped him become a legend. Francis Ford. Coppola, the master who became a stranger. In the early 1970s, no director-actor duo was considered more in tune than Francis Ford Coppola and Robert Duvall. They met in 1971 at a small audition at Paramount Studios. Coppola, who was then only 32, upon seeing Duvall, told the producer, "He's the Tom Hagen I've been looking for." That phrase elevated Duvall, an anonymous theater actor, to the ranks of international stars. The Godfather not only changed cinema, it also united the two men with a connection that was half mentor, half brotherhood. Coppola would often invite Duvall to his home, where they would dine, listen to jazz, and discuss how to incorporate silence into acting. For Duvall, Coppola was the true master. But glory brought trials. In 1976, Coppola began filming Apocalypse Now in the Philippines, a film described as hell shot on 35mm. Duvall took on the role of Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore, an eccentric character with the line that would later become immortal. "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." The set was a real battlefield. Coppola rented real helicopters, caused real explosions, and built entire camps in the jungle. Temperatures exceeded 40 degrees, with humidity of almost 100%. A single day of shooting lasted up to 18 hours. According to the documentary Hearts of Darkness, one day, Duvall fainted on set from dehydration, but Coppola, obsessed, still demanded, "Do it again. The light's not real enough." A cameraman told the Los Angeles Times, "Duvall threw up some blood, but he still got on his horse and redid the scene that same afternoon. No one dared to object." When the film was finished, it became an icon. Coppola received the Palme d'Or, and Duvall was praised as the soul of the film, but his name was relegated in the Oscar nominations. From there, the bond between them broke. In 1989, Coppola invited Duvall again for The Godfather 3. It seemed to promise a legendary reunion until the numbers on the contract appeared. Paramount offered Duvall $1 million, while Al Pacino received $5 million plus a percentage of the box office. Duvall felt slighted. When he asked to renegotiate, the studio let him know that no increase was possible. On September 5th, Variety published that Duvall was rejecting the film for wage injustice. In a brief interview, Duvall said, "I will not act in a film about the family if that family does not respect each other." That statement became a headline and was the final blow that ended their golden relationship. Coppola tried to reconcile repeatedly. He sent letters, made calls, but Duvall never responded. In October 1991, at a fundraiser, they crossed paths. journalists wrote. Duvall turned around without a word, while Coppola remained frozen in the crowd. The following year, when Coppola filed for bankruptcy, Duvall was asked if he felt sorry for his former mentor. He only replied briefly, "Arrogance doesn't buy loyalty." The two never spoke again. In 2011, Coppola received a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Oscars. When he took the stage, Duvall's seat in the middle row was empty. Dustin Hoffman. The old friendship turned into a professional breakup. After that collapse, Duvall thought he was hardened against pain. But fate always knows how to mock. Only a few years later, he would meet an old friend, the one with whom he once shared a small apartment in New York, ate canned noodles, and dreamed artistic dreams side by side. Before becoming two Hollywood monuments, Robert Duvall and Dustin Hoffman were just two poor actors renting a dilapidated loft in New York. In 1959, the room was barely 15 square meters, with damp walls and winters so cold they burned candles for warmth. Both studied at the same theater, drank cheap coffee, and did unpaid auditions just to shout a line in front of others. At that time, they were like brothers. They read Tennessee Williams scripts late into the night and shared every cigarette. They once dreamed that one day their names would shine on a Broadway marquee. But Hollywood always puts a price on dreams. In 1967, Dustin Hoffman shot to stardom with The Graduate. Overnight, he became the symbol of a new generation. Time magazine put his picture on the cover with the headline, "The Anti-Star Who Became a Star." Meanwhile, Duvall was still struggling with small roles on television. From that moment on, Hoffman changed. He lived entirely as his characters, eating, speaking, and sleeping as them, what professionals call absolute method acting. Duvall, who valued discipline, felt uncomfortable. He believed that acting was an intellectual art, not an endurance test. While he maintained a boundary between self and character, Hoffman erased it completely. This opposition remained latent for years until it erupted in the late 70s. In 1976, Hoffman filmed Marathon Man. To have a truly tired face in a torture scene, he stayed awake for 3 nights. His co-star, Laurence Olivier, joked, "Why don't you try acting, dear boy? It's much easier." 3 years later, in Kramer vs. Kramer, the friendship of Duvall and Hoffman was buried forever. In an argument scene, Hoffman slapped Meryl Streep for real and without warning. The blow was so hard that Streep burst into tears and left the set. The director had to stop filming for an hour. The Los Angeles Herald-Examiner titled, "Method Acting or Artistic Violence?" For Hollywood, it was devotion to the role. For Duvall, it was an abuse of emotion. He told his friend Bill Murray, "I don't recognize Dustin anymore." In the early 80s, they still met occasionally at awards ceremonies, but the look had changed. In 1989, at the post-Oscar party, Vanity Fair captured Duvall standing up and leaving the table as Hoffman entered, without even a greeting. The article called it, "The Silence Between Two Monuments." Their 20-year friendship ended without a word. Time passed. Hoffman remained a star, but his reputation deteriorated. In 2017, when Hollywood was rocked by the Me Too scandal, his name resurfaced. Past stories of inappropriate behavior appeared everywhere. At the same time, Robert Duvall, who was then in his 80s, was asked at a panel about ethical boundaries in acting. Duvall did not mention names, but said slowly, "Some forget that actors borrow life to tell stories. They don't have the right to own it." That sentence left the room in silence and then erupted in applause. The friendship of Duvall and Hoffman faded like smoke on a Broadway stage, leaving Hollywood with a bitter lesson. Sometimes, in the search for truth, artists lose themselves before they realize it. But if Hoffman exhausted Duvall with his extremism, the next on the list ignited his fury with pure, hard arrogance. A legend that America revered as a symbol of manhood, but for Duvall, he was simply a man who lived in the illusion of power. John Wayne, The Fiery Clash in Colorado. Summer 1968. The True Grit team sets up base in Ridgway, Colorado. At the center of it all was veteran director Henry Hathaway, known for his strictness, and beside him, John Wayne, the legend, already over 60, limping but still exuding authority. Meanwhile, Robert Duvall, who was then 37, was chosen to play the outlaw, Lucky Ned Pepper. Duvall respected Wayne, admiring him since childhood. But within weeks, the image of the hero crumbled before his eyes. According to the assistant director's diary, Hathaway ordered a reshoot of the duel between Wayne and Duvall. It was infernally hot. Hathaway wanted Duvall to remain rigid, expressionless, but Duvall objected, insisting that Ned Pepper was a corrupt, tormented outlaw. The argument lasted almost 30 minutes. John Wayne, who considered the director's orders as divine laws, was enraged by the delay. According to a crew member, Wayne stormed in, pointed at Duvall, and shouted so loudly that it was heard on the ambient microphone. No one knew the exact words, but seconds later, Duvall threw his cowboy hat on the ground, and Wayne raised his hand as if to strike. The set froze. Hathaway cut the scene and stopped filming for 2 days to calm the tensions. The story leaked. Life magazine published a report titled, "Robert Duvall, the man who did not bow to the icon of America." The article said that Wayne pressured Paramount to never include Duvall in another Western project. Years later, it was confirmed that Duvall was excluded from the studio system for 3 years. Still, when True Grit was released, John Wayne won his first Oscar, while Duvall was not mentioned in any category. Ironically, the same scene that caused the dispute was praised by the New York Times as the most authentic moment in the film. At a post-Oscar party, Wayne ignored Duvall at the same table. In 1971, the Playboy interview scandal erupted, where Wayne declared his belief in white superiority. Among the few who spoke out was Robert Duvall. He said, "A true icon is someone who listens to the times, not someone who proclaims himself to define them." When John Wayne passed away, a national funeral was held. Hundreds of stars attended. Only Robert Duvall was absent. The cameras scanned the honorary row, where the plaque that read Mr. Duvall was empty. Henry Hathaway, the dictatorial director. That conflict taught Duvall the price of staying true to himself, but he still didn't know that, a few years later, the one who would really enrage him would not be a star, but the man behind the camera. At the helm of True Grit was Henry Hathaway, an old guard director, 70 years old, whom the industry feared and respected. He carried a directing baton everywhere and would strike it against the ground when giving each order. Hathaway could not stand actors who created freely. He believed that every emotion should be controlled by the camera. A lighting technician wrote in his diaries, "He would shout all day, even hit with his baton the wheel of a prop when someone made a mistake." Duvall, reluctant to be forced, fought back hard. The conflict erupted in the final confrontation scene. Hathaway wanted Duvall to stand still, impassive. Duvall refused, arguing that his character should show the fear of a man about to die. The argument escalated until Hathaway smashed his director's chair on the ground, breaking the lens of a camera. According to a reporter, Duvall was isolated right after that day. No one spoke to him during breaks. His meals were separated. Hathaway even cut several of Duvall's lines in the last two scenes without warning. "I'll teach him to respect the commander," a crew member recalled Hathaway saying. Years later, it was learned that Paramount once refused to hire Duvall simply because Hathaway did not want his name on any project. In an unusual interview, when asked about True Grit, Duvall was silent for a long time and then said quietly, "That film taught me the value of freedom. No one has the right to command emotions." Bruce Beresford, an Oscar victory that brought no peace. Spring, 1982. Robert Duvall was on the set of Tender Mercies. No one on set knew that. Right after one of the most moving scenes of 80s cinema, a silent war would erupt between Duvall and director Bruce Beresford, which would last until the Oscars. Beresford was an obsessive perfectionist. Meanwhile, Robert Duvall believed that cinema should arise from real emotion, from the small human flaws. Two opposing philosophies clashed from day one. The biggest conflict arose with the church scene, considered the soul of the film. Duvall wanted to shoot at 5 in the morning, in the natural blue-gray dawn of Texas, but Beresford insisted on waiting until night for a warmer light. The argument lasted until midnight. Finally, Duvall quietly called the second unit and filmed the scene at dawn the next day, before Beresford arrived. When the director found out, he stormed off to his hotel. Ironically, that rebellious scene was chosen as the key sequence in the final cut. Variety wrote, "It was the truest moment, created solely by Duvall." After filming, the tension remained. Duvall demanded to participate in the editing for fear that his scene would be destroyed, but Universal refused. In March 1984, Tender Mercies made history. The small film won 2 Oscars, including Best Actor for Robert Duvall. That night, Duvall appeared in a simple suit, thanked the screenwriter and the crew, but never mentioned Bruce Beresford. The room fell silent. The next morning, The Hollywood Reporter titled, "Duvall, at the Oscars, ignores his director." The press went into a frenzy. When asked about it, Beresford simply said, "I respect him, but we can never work together again." Meanwhile, Duvall opted for silence. He refused to participate in talk shows after the ceremony and stayed on his farm for months. Years later, on Inside the Actor's Studio, when asked about the film, Duvall only said, "Sometimes you have to choose between loyalty to the character or to someone else. I chose the character." And so, after more than half a century under the dazzling lights of Hollywood, Robert Duvall remained frank, firm, and never compromised with falsehood. The conflicts, the wounds he recounted, were not just behind-the-scenes stories. They were mirrors that reflected the darkest side of an industry that seemed impeccable. Because behind every Oscar statue, every smile on the red carpet, there were always silent battles. Battles between fame, loyalty, and above all, truth. Duvall chose truth, and although it cost him friendships and opportunities, it allowed him to build one of the most respected and authentic careers in the history of cinema. And you, who do you think, among all these names, did the most harm to Robert Duvall? Or do you think his intransigence was the necessary price for his genius? Leave a comment below to join the discussion. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share the video so you don't miss other surprising backstage stories from Hollywood that you have almost certainly never heard before.